Hello, everyone. This is another of our Friday focus sessions. So for those who are joining us live, welcome. Good to have you with us. For those who are going to watch the recording, if you couldn't make it live, hello as well. And hopefully you enjoy the next kind of 30-minute webinar that we have for you. So this week we're looking at, and I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the information that I'm going to share. Okay, so you should now see the front slide for the Synapse Analytics Data Flow webinar that we're going to be delivering today. So this is, as I say, one of our 30-minute kind of quick webinars, just to kind of introduce you to the topic, the technologies that we're going to go through. So we've done some previous ones on Power BI licensing and features. There's going to be a recording of the one that we weren't able to do live, which was also going to be around Power BI data flows. And this week, we're actually going to do a slightly different variation on that. We're going to do data flows in what we refer to as either Synapse Analytics or the data factory area. So either data factory or Synapse Analytics data flows. We're going to tell you all about the capabilities of these products and services. And we're going to get started now with that. So let's get right into it. So what is Synapse Analytics data flows, or also referring to data flows that we do in Data Factory? These are essentially capabilities of what we call a code-free interface. So kind of it's a visual interface where we can line up the activities that we need to perform a series of, processes. So in this case, we've got an example here showing where we're actually going to take some customer information and we're going to maybe have some new information coming through over time. So what we need to do is we need to look up if that customer information already exists in the database. If it does, we want to kind of identify which customer in turn, and then we might want to perform some updates, and we also maybe need to do something of setting date. So we refer to something like a slowly changing dimension. So for customers, we're not probably changing new information every single time, but over time, we may be adding new information for that customer, maybe changing their address or email accounts or contact information. So potentially we will need to kind of look at the customer ID, find who that is, set some dates of the current kind of valid range of data. So if it's a slowly changing dimension type 1, we'll kind of just have the most recent data and the only data, we kind of override the existing data. But we may have something like a slowly changing dimension 2, where we want to keep the historical values as well. So this is going to be a great way of using something like a data flow to visually flow out the kind of activities and go from one step to the next step to the next step. And we can see here, we've also got some branching strategies in play here. So we are looking up the existing data table, getting data values back, and then bringing that into the pipeline as well. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about what this is, how you can create these data flows, where you're going to do that in Synapse Analytics or the data factory space. It's kind of a similar process, similar technology steps to do that. We're going to talk about how we scale this service. So whether you've just got a handful of records or whether it's going to be a large amount of data you might be processing, say, on a monthly basis, and how we then can trigger that activity. We'll talk about scripts. This is kind of the code element that actually is the vision behind the scenes for you. So although this is like a code-free activity in terms of your dragging and kind of applying the kind of definitions of what you want to do, there is code being generated for you that we can then look at the scripts and take that scripts and reuse that elsewhere. There's a term called flowlets as well, where we can kind of take portions of our kind of data flow and kind of bring that into what we call a flowlet. So kind of, reusable code segments, for example. So we're going to explain what that's all about. So some of the things that we need to be aware of when we're talking about activities such as a data flow is the performance of that service. So, in this case, we might be optimizing the partitioning strategy. Are we going to use a round robin? That's essentially we're placing one piece of data on one node, and the next piece of data comes in, we just place on the next available node, and we go round the houses, go round robin for that. We may have a partition strategy that's based on a hash value. So the actual values may be determining where that value, which node that value sits on. We've got things called dynamic range and fixed ranges as well, and also key values. So there's a few different kind of strategies we can use to partition the data to make it more efficient when we're going to provide kind of a large amount of throughput there. Of course, like anything, we need to monitor all the activities that we're doing. So we will look at the activity runs, we will delve into the details, we can see how many rows have been processed, what amount of time has been kind of activities of those processes as well. So we have lots of kind of metadata that we can kind of take access of in order to see how well things have been running, or whether we need to do some performance tuning, for example. Naturally, with anything, we have potential for what we refer to as a bottleneck. Now, a bottleneck simply means that we have the slowest part of the process. Now, that could be that we are starting the cluster from a kind of a stop state into a working state. So it might take a multiple minutes to actually kind of stand up that cluster and have that cluster up and running in order then to utilize that cluster. So if you imagine it can be kind of not used for a while, it's going to close down, we're going to save some money, but we need to maybe have the startup time. And that could be in multiple minutes, and that might be a factor that you'll need to bring into your equation. We might be reading a lot of data. So the source read time, how quickly we can read data from the source. Is it a database table? Is it a flat file, for example, in a data lake, some storage somewhere? There's going to be activities or transformations that we're going to do. So basically, pretty much the data flow is performing transformations. So there may be a bunch of different transformations, and these may take time. We may be doing like a ranking activity. We may be performing some kind of cleansing operations, etc. So of course, the transformations may also take a certain amount of time. We may need to look at how much time is being spent in that process as well. And finally, the kind of where do we deliver the output? What kind of sync in terms of where's the delivery going to happen? So we may have some sync processing time. So we may need to identify if there's any of these areas needs a bit of a tweak, a bit of an improvement. If so, how do we do that? So we might need to look at kind of the activities we're doing there and find maybe a more efficient way, or do some tuning on those activities at that time. Okay, so cluster startup, source read time, transformations, and then finally where we're kind of the sync operations, where we're going to send that data to. One of the key major capabilities, and you maybe saw that we're going to do a demo later on, so I'm going to take you through this in a bit more detail, is the branching strategy. And that simply means that we might need to go and look at existing data. We might need to have some logic deployed in our flow that's going to allow us to perform kind of an output based on different conditions. So we may have some additional branches or joins or exist kind of activities that we need to bring into the equation. So very often we might need to look up a value. So in this case, maybe the customer ID, we're going to go and grab that and see if it exists already. But if it doesn't, we know that we're going to create a new record. So we might do an upsert or kind of a merge time operation or an insert, depends on the activities that we're trying to achieve. So the branching strategy could be a similar or multiple types of operations on the same data. So data comes in, we might need to do 2 or 3 things with that data. We might want to be storing some raw data into a storage account. We might be putting that data into a database. We could be performing some additional transformations based on the values that we find in that as well. So does the customer already exist? Then we've got a different flow process than we will do if we need to insert a brand new customer. Joins, obviously joining data either back on itself, self-join, or with other data sets is going to be another scenario that we need to have. And of course, we might need to be sending it to multiple places at the same time. So some might go into, say, a Power BI report. Some of it might go into a database like Synapse Analytics Workspace. It could go into just a local storage location or an Azure storage, for example. So these are some of the options that we need to be able to do with, say, the data flows. We need some branching capability there. Let's talk about the expressions, because this is kind of probably the key thing that we're doing is when we build our transformations, we're kind of essentially telling it that we need it to do something. So let's look at kind of some of the capabilities that we have. So in the data flow itself, well, at the top, you can see here, we've got an open expression builder, or on each of the individual columns, we can do the open expression builder for just that column. So we can do it for like multiple columns or just an individual column. And essentially, we're going to bring up this visual builder interface. Now we have a previews pane as well at the bottom that we can kind of look at the data, how it's being transformed. But what we do have is a lot of activities that we can perform. So some of the things are expression elements where we can kind of alter the data, add new functions, and do lots of kind of activities against that data. You know, kind of maybe just a one-to-one mapping. We may be changing the name. We may be doing a dynamic expression at that point based on the values that we have. So we have lots of things like functions and parameters that we can utilize to make it much more efficient and kind of parameterize our use of that code. We have cache lookups. We can look up an existing value that's either in that data flow or is already in the system someplace in terms of a global value. We've had the preview features. We can look at the data and go, okay, well, how did it transform? What does it look like when we finish? So is it doing the types of activities that we expect it to do? We can also make changes to strings. We can do commenting on our code. So you can imagine there's lots of kind of additional capabilities that we can do in this expression builder to kind of build our business rules and build our functionality that we need in that. We can use regular expressions, and we've got some keyboard shortcuts as well that will help us perform these activities. Now, there's a lot of different things that we can do, so let's have a look at a few of those. We're not going to go through every one, but we're just going to pick up a few of the ones. Okay. Here I've broken it down into the types of categories. So if it's a row modifier or a schema modifier, is it a format? Are we flattening the records? Are we filtering the records? Are we doing different outputs with conditional splits? So some major kind of different capabilities with these different functions that exist in there. So we've got the aggregate, the alter row, the assert, etc. There's a few more to look up there. So we've got our joins, our lookups, our branching strategies. We can parse our data, things like pivoting, ranking, selecting, and of course a few more there kind of with our sorting operations, our Windows functions. We're going to do that a little bit more in a bit more detail. And joining records or unpivoting or union the records. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of kind of capabilities that we have with the code expressions that we can build and these different kind of functions that we can employ. There's something we call a meta function. So it's kind of it's by item, by origin, by origins, name and names. So these are kind of more complicated kind of ways of performing activities on the data. Just be aware kind of that, this is something also that's going to be very useful when you're doing these data flows. So kind of get familiar with the capabilities here, selecting the records and what you're going to be searching for example. Additional ones are path, position, origin, and we got some hex kind of capabilities there as well. So I'm not going to go into lots of details. There's lots of documentation out there that goes into the kind of main details on how to use these, but I just wanted to make you aware that we have these meta functions as well that allows us to look at that data as we're processing it and maybe kind of examine that data a little bit. Okay, as always, we want to spend a good amount of time in these sessions doing some demos for you, kind of showing you what's what, rather than just kind of a bunch of slides. So let's go and jump into our demo now. So I'm just going to exit out of my PowerPoint slide for a second, and I'm going to go over to our Synapse Analytics space. So what I've done is I've got an existing Synapse Analytics workspace already deployed, and inside that I've gone into the integrate function. So this is kind of where I can build out some additional capabilities like my pipelines. and my link connections, my copy data, etc. But what I want to do here under my pipelines, I'm actually going to create a new pipeline. And you can see here, we called this update customer dimensions. So this is an example of a kind of data flow that we can do here that's going to, or create the pipeline that's going to create all of the activities that we need here. Now, if we go into, say, the data, you can see that we have our existing data already that's been kind of added in. We got our tables in our database called SQL Pool. And I've got a couple of different tables here. I've got my dim customer dimension there. I'll kind of smooth that over a little bit. If I can get the cursor just to sit in the right place today. Doesn't want to sit there. Seems to be very, very okay. I'm gonna not try and move that. For some reason I can't grab the edge of it. But I can see I've got my customer table. And if I go and look at that, I've got for example, my records. And you can see there's nothing in my customer dimension table. What I do have is I have my initial customer source, and I've got this table, which is going to grab that data. So I go to my customer source and look at my rows in here. You can see that we do have a whole bunch of rows for the customer. So these are existing customer, but what we don't have is the data in our dimension table. So we've got our original source CSV, and we want to kind of bring that data into our dimension table. So what we're going to do is we'll build out a pipeline that's going to look at the source. And let me take you through each of these activities in turn and show you what we have here. This isn't the full range of capabilities, but I wanted to showcase some of the functions there. So we're going to start off with our source. And here we have what we refer to as a data set. In this case, an integration data set. We have inline, we have workspace, but this is our source. And essentially, you can see here that this is mapped to our customer source table. So remember that one with the CSVs that had those records already. We have our customer source. And what I could do, if I wanted to look at the preview, I could go and just refresh that data. I've already turned on the debug operation. That takes a few minutes to get up and running. And give me a few seconds, it's going to bring back that customer information here. Always takes I think I hadn't run this query before, so it's probably just kind of populating it as well. So we give it a second or two. Well, while it's doing that, let's kind of look at what we have around our settings. So basically, we have our source options. You can see it's the table. I've enabled staging. There's probably a good reason for that. In most cases, you will want to have like a stage in place just to kind of bring your data in a bit safely, do some validation checks on it before you fully update into the full production version. So you may want to do that. And we could even have incremental extract as well. And here, for example, is adding dynamic content. If we did that, that would take us to that expression builder. And we could then start building out our expressions, and we can create new parameters. We can use a whole bunch of different functions. We can do our cache lookups. We've got our library of functions if we had that. That's a new preview item as well. But let's clear on that for a second. Projection is what is the data type for the column name. So customer ID, for example, is an integer. You can see there's a whole bunch of strings there for the rest of the columns there. In optimize, this is where we were looking earlier, we have the ability to potentially use a partitioning strategy. But we're going to use just the current partitioning, and here we can also set the number of partitions as well if we wanted to do that. We also can inspect the schema, the definition and the design of that. And in the preview, if I come to that, you can see now we've got some records there, and we're able to also kind of do inserts here directly. So we can actually do some code kind of adding some data rather into that as well. And you see that we do have, I think, 100 records coming back at the moment in this case. All right, so that was the first activity. Now, if you look where we go next, we go to the next one. We've gone from 10 columns to 11 columns. So what have we done here? Well, what we've done is we're going to add in an additional column called the customer hash. What are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to take some additional information. Let me kind of go into the expression builder here. And you can see what we've done is we're taking the title, the first name and the middle name and the last name and the suffix, company name, salesperson, email address and phone. and we're combining all of those values, and we're then hashing it with the SHA-2 hash function. So we're creating a hashed value. This specific customer with all of these values, when we bring them together, concatenate them and hash it, we get a certain ID. Great. So we kind of know who's who. And if we had, say, a different customer with a different, say, middle name or company name or salesperson, we would have a different hash value there. Okay. So we've added in an extra kind of hash key. Now what we're doing now, you can see here, we've got a reference. What are we doing here? Well, this is where we're going to see if that customer exists or doesn't exist. Okay, so we're basically looking for, does the customer, you can see down in the expression, exist? So there's our hash key that we just did a few minutes ago. And inside, obviously, the table, we have our hash key column, and we're seeing if we have a match or we don't have a match in this case. So we're bringing that value back. So you can see here, we've got this kind of pipeline that's going from the deemed customer. We've only got 2 columns. What have we got here? We've only got 2 columns. And what we're looking at is, we go to projection. We've got the inserted date, the modified date, and we've got the hash key. So we basically got some additional columns here. When do we insert the record? When was it last modified? And also, what's the hash key value? Okay, so we are using that to join into the exist, and we're looking at the records there. So we go to the lookup customer table, and we go to the preview there. Let's kind of just wait for that to come up, and let's just refresh that briefly. Oh, no value for database name. So I need to kind of provide the name of the database, in this case, the SQL pool, into there to make that work. So we'll leave that for a second. So here we're looking for any row match where the customer ID in the lookup table, either dim customer table, has a match into the dim customer ID. So we kind of, does that record already exist? We're not using anything more than the current partitioning and the auto broadcast, but we do have some additional kind of options there as well. We wanted to do that. Okay. Now, what do we do here now? We want to set the dates of any either insert operation, either the first time we put the record in, or in this case, also when we update the value. So the modified date is going to get the current timestamp. So we're going to get a UTC value, time date value kind of plugged in there. So we know that this is the current record. Obviously, we've got some historical records then going back of when we added the record, and then anytime we kind of updated it. We are going to allow what we call upserts. Now, what that really means is that we are going to allow the ability for the data to be updated if it already exists. An upsert means if it's not there, we insert it. If it is there, we're going to update it. Okay. So we're not going to do a delete if, we're not doing an update if, we're doing what we call an upsert if. So basically, if the condition is true, then we're going to allow us to make that change. Okay. Then finally, we need to export the data to the dim customers table. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a mapping activity that's going to take all this source information. You can see here the source customer, title, first name, middle name, etc. It's going to be mapped to the internal structure. Inserted date, modified date, and customer hash key is going to then be inserted into those records there. Okay, we are going to skip any duplicate columns and skip any duplicate output columns. So kind of doing that. Now, what do we do in terms of the optimization? Well, we're going to use the current partitioning. We can obviously go and also check the records and see if we are, again, we don't have the database name. So what I'm going to do is we will, when we kind of go and run this, we will provide the database name. In this case, it's going to be the SQL pool. Let me show you what that looks like again, just so kind of you can see here. So I'm going to skip over to my data pane. I'm going to go to my customer tables, and you can see here we've got a table called customer source, and it's got these columns in it. And then we've got a table called dim customer that has those columns and the additional 3 columns for inserted date, modified date, and hash key as well. Okay. So when we created the original table, We created it as what we refer to as a heap. That is, it had no index. We copied a bit of data across. By the way, when we post this on our YouTube channel and also on our data train website, and we're going to give the instructions on how to get the instructions to kind of create the same process and do this yourself, kind of follow through. We create our customer table. In this case, we created it with a replicate distribution. So what that means is the dimension table, dim meaning dimension, customer, we want that on every single node because we want to have, it's going to be pretty small. We don't have 1 billion customers. Hopefully we might do it one day, but like we have a handful of customers. So having a small table on each of the data warehouse nodes means that when we want to do a lookup, it's nice and efficient because we basically can run any query on that node and we can go and reference that dim customer table and it's going to have a copy because we've replicated one on every single node there. We got a color store index, which means it's nice and efficient in terms of the compression, everything else. And each of these columns are then stored internally separately in their own structures, and they can be highly compressed and highly efficient there. So we can do some very fast processing there. So we created the structures. We are copying some data into the customer source, and we've got this empty table that we created as well. So this is what we've done. Now, if you see here in the dim customer table, we do have no records so far. It's basically it's 0 records because we haven't run this process yet. Okay. And if we go to the source table, we have all these records. I think we have a few. Well, we've got 100 records actually. Let's see how many records we do have in total. I'm just going to remove the top query. So I think in this case we have 441 records. Okay. So what we do is we're going to potentially look at running this process. So let me go back and see what we have set here. So I think we've got everything ready to go. We are not going to enable staging in this example, but we would probably want to do that. And if you wanted some pre or post scripts as well, you could also do that as well. So that's going to be a nice kind of way there. Let's go to our mapping. You can see we've got our mappings already deployed. Optimizers kind of normal. Everything's kind of ready to go. I think we kind of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our debug settings and we're going to check to connect to. I think we've already got this already. We already have it already selected. There we are. The auto resolve IR integration runtime. So that is the code that we're going to run. And we're going to go and now we're going to just validate, make sure that this is validated. It has gone through. Okay. And let me see if I can just publish the scripts. So I'm going to publish those changes. And what we're then going to do is we're going to, so this is the data flow that we have. We want to run a pipeline that's going to execute that. So let me go and just go back to the integrate. Okay, now here's our pipeline. And basically, it's a slowly changing dimension. We can now go and trigger this activity. Now, I'm not sure if I've set all the values up. Let me just upgrade. I think I need to set up the, so I was seeing this earlier where I get an error, but it doesn't tell me what I've got the error on. So I think it's going to be the database name. So I'm going to just put in a value. Oh, let me change that one sec. I'm just going to change that to a SQL pool. I can type. And I think we're pretty much coming up to time anyway. So I've changed that to a SQL pool. So this is basically the so database name, not round. Okay. Oh, it needs the @ symbol at the front of it. So let me just put that in there. One sec. There we go. Okay. Okay. So what I can do now is I can run a debug operation of that. So it says does not match the type. Okay. 1 second. Did I miss something now? Let's just make sure I've got it listed in. Pool. There we go. Okay. Click OK. So let's see now we can run the debug operation. So I'm not sure why that's failing, which is annoying because I had it running earlier. So I may have changed something inadvertently and not sure what I've changed. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so it looks like the database name should be its name's SQL pool. Just make sure I've got it. I think maybe it's the case sensitivity. For the case sensitivity on that. Okay, let's see if we can run that debug. Looks like it still doesn't match the value. All right, what I'll do is I will actually, as we're kind of out of time right now, I'm going to do the run. I will record that and put that in the video as well that I'm going to upload to the YouTube. But thank you very much for joining today. Hopefully this does kind of explain a little bit about data flows. There's a whole bunch of really good information about how to do data flows inside of the Azure environment. That is the Synapse Analytics or the Data Factory. It's a very, very useful capability, and we will be kind of sharing some more information about those in our next webinars and other videos as well. Look forward to you joining us at the next one. Thank you very much for being here today, and we will see you next time round. Thank you very much, and bye for now. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. And I will stop the recording.